The hunt. She left me. Something in the way the man said it told Joel he wasn't looking for a ride back. He was fine with that. Putting strangers in his canoe wasn't his habit. Still, he'd come across the lake to offer help, so he sat there waiting to hear more. You'd think 40 years would buy you more than that, but then you'd be wrong. Joel had watched the fire flicker from across the lake for the better part of 3 weeks. Watched it when the leaves blazed yellow and red, autumn gusts stripped the trees bare, and the first frost came and went. Finally, he slipped his canoe in the water and crossed for a closer look. The ice could come any day now, and the fire and the smoke were still there night after night. He paddled up dead quiet, invisible, until he was sure it was safe to go ashore. We came up on our houseboat. Joel nodded. He knew as much. At least he'd figured it. This was, after all, the spot on the lake where the boats often moored, as many as 7 or 8 at a time, usually filled with college students out for a raucous weekend of drinking and splashing and howling. He worried that one of these days someone would drown, or a bonfire would get out of control and the island he loved to watch from his dock would be reduced to a blackened stubble. But the boats were all gone now. The operator who rented most of them long closed for the season. And apart from an occasional hunter or fisherman zipping up the lake, the water had been empty until that last boat had shown up, anchored, then left 2 days later. From what he could gather, that being the one piloted by this man's wife, the day she left him. Must have pissed her off some bad, he said, offering the man a smoke. The man shook his head and Joel lit his own. That I did, said the man. More than once, but she was always good at forgiving as long as I asked for it and made it up to her somehow. Joel watched him drag a branch over to the fire and lay it so its middle rested in the flame, the ends running a good 4 feet out either side of the rock-ringed pit. Everything was wet from the rain, but the guy had a store of fallen wood under a canopy he'd made by lashing cedars together. Past that, Joel made out a smaller dome, just large enough for someone to crawl in and stay dry. You plan on staying here long? Joel asked. The man stared into the flames and said, only till I can walk home. You mean across the lake? That's right. When it freezes and I can cross it, I'm going back. Back where? To my wife. The one who left you. That's right. Joel took a drag of his cigarette, not sure what to make of this. The man said, last thing she told me was she wouldn't take me back till hell freezes over. That's what I'm waiting for. I hate to break it to you, buddy, said Joel, but this here is Skunk Lake, and while it ain't a pretty name, it ain't hell neither. Well, that's where you'd be wrong, the man said. My son died in this lake. If that don't make it hell, I don't know what does. Joel pulled a Mickey flask from under his jacket, unscrewed the cap, and offered it to the man. That he accepted. After taking a sip, he wiped the top of his sleeve and handed it back across the fire to Joel. He was 16, said the man. Stronger than I ever was at his age. Played football, proud as sin to wear the team jacket. Good in school, too, a constant source of amazement for me and my wife. 20 years ago last week, as a matter of fact, I'd gone on the hunt, me and 3 guys from work, just like we did every year. And I guess he thought it was time I asked him along. Joel nodded. He joined his own old man on the hunt at 16, which was probably 2 years later than the generation before. People were more strict these days, about some things at least. I would have let him come, far as that goes, but my wife was no fan of guns. Besides, there'd be a lot of drinking at night, and I figured, why cause a problem? We went further up the lake, up past the reserve. Deer were good there then. They're everywhere now, but back then a lot of spots were hunted out. And that was one of our usual camps if we were going to stay local. We bagged a 6-point buck and a couple smaller ones. It was a good hunt. It was the last time I ever went. Joel took another sip from his flask before handing it across the fire. The man held it, waiting before taking a drink of his own. When we got back, my wife was a wreck. She said Johnny'd gone after me, followed us up the lake. And when he wasn't there with me when I came in the door, she lost it. She said, "Where can he be? What if he drowned? You think he ran away? Where's my son?" Joel imagined the couple's reaction to learning their son had drowned. He wanted to ask where the body was found. He wanted to know what kind of boat the boy had been in. If he was smart and strong like his father had said, how could he have drowned out here? And how could it be Joel had never heard of it? There wasn't much that went on in this lake, no matter how long ago, that he didn't know about. People like to talk. My buddies spent the next week with me. Half the town came out, looking up and down the lake in every bay, on all the islands. No one ever found his body. The canoe neither. They even put out posters down in Toronto thinking maybe he'd run away. Maybe it hadn't been in the water after all. Maybe he'd just taken off, wanting to teach me a lesson. My wife never lost hope. Women are like that. Not till last month. The man took another sip but held the flask. Joel didn't reach for it. I always prayed she'd give up, but then I thought maybe it was okay that way. More than once, she told me that believing he'd come home was the only thing that left her with a flicker of happiness, a will to go on. Really, how could I take that away from her? Joel stared into the fire. We sold the house a few years back. It was time. Too big for the two of us. His room still full of trophies, his jersey on his chair where he'd left it. Not the jacket, though, as he'd worn it when he took off. I kept my hunting gear out in the houseboat, even though I never used it again. Left it tucked away in a cupboard with some tools. I hadn't looked at it in nearly 10 years. Before that, I used to sneak out sometimes, take it out, touch it, feel it. He brought his fingers to his nose. Smell it. It was my own way of dealing with the loss, my own private way. I can't swear I'd forgotten about it. How could I? Maybe I wanted her to find it, but when she came ashore, carrying his football jacket with the bullet hole through the chest, my world crumbled. The man drained whatever was left in the flask and dropped it at his feet. He put his hands to his temples, rubbing them. You see, we never could be sure whose bullet it was. We were horsing around after the dinner, tossing fireworks into the water, taking shots at them as it came down. Last thing I saw was that jacket and his face, eager as all get out, beaming at me, lit red and green, waving his paddle from the canoe.